Hi again. In our continuing authors forum, I have with me today Ron Elliott of Bardstown, Kentucky, who I guess I would call you a history nonfiction writer. Would that be correct?
That's a sore point, Rebecca.
Okay.
I go to great lengths to get the facts, but then I write it more like it's a novel because these really were real live people that lived and breathed and laughed and cried just like you and I. And so the powers that be call my work historical fiction, although as far as I'm concerned, there's no fiction involved.
Well, okay. Well, let's just show the books that we're talking about and the kind of subjects that you are writing about. Kentucky history is
Yes,
where
ma'am.
you're at, and we love Kentucky history in Owen County. So I
There's a
know
lot of it.
your current book is about a notorious governor that we all learned about in our history classes, Goebbels.
Yes, ma'am.
So you want to show that book?
Okay,
And
here it is.
this is about the assassination, and I want to hear lots of stories about that. The other book that I wanted you to talk about is the Beverly Hills book, because the Beverly Hills Supper Club book, because it is the book that is available as an ebook, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So that even though the library is closed, you can still get this book on our Overdrive Libby app.
Yeah, and of course, all of my books are available from Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
Great. Yeah, we do have the physical book in the library, but nobody can get into the library right now. So you can, if you want to read this book that we're going to talk about, you can purchase it through Amazon.
Yes.
Okay, Ron.
Okay, here we go.
One of the things I found most interesting in looking over all the stuff that you sent me is that you identify yourself as an author and a raconteur.
Well,
So,
yeah, my personality is such that you can't talk to me for more than 2 or 3 minutes, as you already found out before I tell you a story. The story in my family I grew up with was that my dad's uncle, a man who married my grandfather's sister, is the guy that shot William Goebel. I had heard that story for as long as I could remember. And then one day, about 25 years ago, I stumbled across in the state archives, the man's name was Barry Howard, Barry Howard's trial transcript for the murder of William Goebel. And Rebecca, you know, authors and movie people always say that this is an incredible story, but this is an incredible story. And I wrote this 25 years ago, and the name of it is Assassination at the State House. And about a year ago, I was casting around for a new project, and my publisher said, that Assassination at the State House has been out of print. Why don't you redo that? And I thought, well, that's a good idea, because my research skills are so much better than they were 25 years ago. And the resources are just incredible. So I redid it. This is the new version. And it contains a lot of information that I didn't know in the first place. And you said you wanted me to tell you a story, and I will, about, and just to illustrate how incredible that Assassination at the State House is. Here we go. There was a man by the name of Henry Yahtzee who was evidently a very weak personality. And in the middle of his trial, someone was on the witness stand testifying about a conversation he had had with Henry Yahtzee. Yahtzee jumped up and he screamed, "That is a lie. I never spoke to that man in my life." The judge, who is determined to convict these people as anybody else is, said, quote, "Mr. Sheriff, if that man don't behave himself, you put a pair of handcuffs on him." Henry Yahtzee screamed, "I will not sit here and let them swear my life away." He collapsed on the floor unconscious. Henry Yahtzee's lawyer says, "Your Honor, I think we ought to recess here." And the judge said, "Well, Counselor, I guess you are due a postponement." The lawyer said, pointed at Henry Yahtzee laying on the floor, and he said, "I think it's due to my client." Well, so they postponed till 9 o'clock the next morning. Lawyer came in, he said, "I'm sorry, my client's in coma." So they postponed until 9 o'clock the next morning. This was in Georgetown, by the way. Lawyer came in and said, "I'm sorry, my client's in coma." The judge said, quote, "Commonwealth of Kentucky's gone to a great amount of trouble to assemble us all here at this venue. Bring that man in here. We will proceed with the trial." Rebekka, they hauled Henry Yahtzee in there on a brass bed from the hotel, set the bed down in the front of the courtroom, put the witness back on the stand. Judge said, quote, "Now, where were we the other day when we were so rudely interrupted?" They tried Henry Yahtzee, him in a coma, convicted him, sentenced him to life in prison, him in a coma.
Well, that was a rude awakening when he came out of his coma, I'm sure.
He was faking it. He was a state employee and he was scared to death that he was going to lose his state job. And he thought that was the best way to get out of that situation. We're going to run a couple of these others by real quickly, and then we'll talk about the Beverly Hills. This is near and dear to my heart. I've always been a Kentucky basketball fan. And so I read in the paper one time that C.M. Newton had asked Ralph Beard to come to UK to talk to Rick Pitino's basketball team. And I presumed what he was going to say was, "Boys, don't screw up your life like I did." So I called Ralph Beard. He wouldn't talk to me. But then I discovered a couple of years ago that he had left about 25 hours worth of oral interviews and video. And so Ralph Beard did tell me about that scandal of 1952 after all.
Great. Well, we have a lot of Kentucky basketball fans in Owen County, so I'm sure that would be a very interesting book for many of them.
Like your children, you're not supposed to have favorites, but has seen the picture of the Marines raising the flag on Iwo Jima. One of those was a Kentucky boy. He was from Fleming County. I got in touch with his family up there and also got his Marine Corps records. He wrote about 25 letters to his mother while he was in the Marine Corps. And it was 1945. He and his mother were very tight. That's part of the story. But he poured his heart out in those letters. And so the man's name was Franklin Sousley, and I know everything there is to know about Franklin Sousley. I hope you can see that picture on the back. That's Franklin's mother.
Uh-huh.
Taken, her son's 40 years dead when that picture was taken. And you can still see grief and pride on her face.
Mm-hmm.
Terrific story.
Did he not make it off of Iwo Jima?
He was killed about a month after that picture was taken. Mm-hmm. And the hardest part of that book, I've had so many people tell me, "You made me cry." And I tell them, "Hey, I had to write it." Name of this book is American El Dorado. There was a man from Elizabethtown who went to California in the early 1840s. He was there for the gold rush. To make a long story short, he found a place, New Mexico, Arizona, out in there somewhere, there's diamonds just laying there on the ground. All you got to do is just pick them up. And of course, everybody laughed at him. He said, "Who knew there was gold in California? Who knew there was silver in Nevada? Who is to say that there aren't diamonds laying on the ground out there somewhere? And ain't I got a sack full of them here to prove it?" Believe the people that he got to invest. Here again, maybe you can see some of that. Most notably, down there in the bottom corner, Mr. Tiffany himself got taken out of this scheme. I have a dear friend, another one of my fishing buddies that was with Charlie Satterwhite and me. His name is John Snell. John is a fabulous photographer. So for the Lincoln Bicentennial, the publisher suggested that I write something about Abraham Lincoln. And he said, "Take your buddy John with you and get some pictures." What am I going to write about Abraham Lincoln that hadn't been done? Well, I'm lucky enough, believe it or not, to find a couple of things that were previously unknown about Abraham Lincoln, believe that or not. Historians will have to cite me forevermore for discovering this. So I got some very, very good text in this book. And I promise you, John's photographs are spectacular. I'll show you one side. I'll just find one here. There's the view of Mary Todd Lincoln's house that you see when you drive by on Main Street in Lexington.
In Lexington,
And just to illustrate the kind of things that John and I did, he snuck around the back. But that gives you a much better idea of the grandeur of the place.
Yeah, right. That garden is lovely.
Okay. Now then, here's inside the Beverly Hills Supper Club fire. I ran across a man by the name of Wayne Damert, who worked at the Beverly Hills. He had been there for 8 or 10 years. Was in there the night of the fire. That was, of course, the quintessential event of Wayne Damert's life. And he had written a manuscript, which was quite frankly pretty terrible. And the publisher asked me to take that off of his hands and write it for him. So I spent a lot of time talking to Wayne and asking him questions about things. And then I did a lot of research as well. And, excuse me, there's a lot of things that are not to be found out about what actually went on in that Beverly Hills Supper Club from its inception until the night it burned down. But I did do a lot of newspaper and internet research and interviewed a whole lot of people. It's a real horror story. And the most interesting part of this book, in my opinion, in the last section of it, Wayne and I interviewed survivors of the fire and, more tragically, children and parents of people that died in the fire. And it's sobering. This is not a feel-good book.
Well, do you want to tell us one story before we have to wrap this up that about any of the books, or yourself, or Charlie Satterwhite, who was a friend of yours and a famous Owen Countyan?
Yeah. I will tell you a story. I was talking to a friend of Franklin Sowsley, who is our Kentucky Iwo Jima flag raiser, on the phone. The man was in Pennsylvania. He was one of Franklin's buddies. And we chatted for a while, and he said, did you know that they gave Iwo Jima back to the Japs? That's not an exact quote. This is very early in my research. And I said, no, sir, I did not know that. And he said, well, they did in 1968. And I subsequently verified that he was right. Lyndon Johnson signed an act that returned Iwo Jima to the Japanese. And we talked about it for a minute. With a sigh, this old boy said, I sure do hope they know what they're doing, because I ain't going back.
I hope they did too. Well, Ron, it's delightful to talk to you. And I think that we need to talk to you again sometime, because you have so much knowledge about Kentucky and its history and the wonderful stories that come out of this Commonwealth.
Well, thank you, ma'am. Let me tell you one other thing real quickly. I grew up in Stanford, Kentucky, which is the second oldest town in Kentucky, on a farm that was between where the fort was and the spring where they got their water. When my grandfather plowed in the spring, I would walk along behind him, and if the arrowhead or a tomahawk wasn't perfect, if it had a chip on it, I wouldn't even bother to bend over and pick it up.
Wow.
And it has occurred to me many times in my latter days that, I was quite literally treading the dark and bloody ground. I think Kentucky history soaked through my bare feet up through that ground.
Sounds like it, for sure. Well, I encourage all of our patrons to check out Ron's books, either digitally or through Amazon, or when the library reopens, check out what we've got. It's a pleasure to talk to you, and I hope we get to have another conversation down the road.
Thank you, ma'am. Anytime. That's what I'm here for.
Great. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay, I've got